Jennifer Gledhill, Marcus Gledhill, Adrian Marrick, and Celeste Veyra. 4 names tied together in a story of passion, betrayal, and murder, where a secret affair spiraled into obsession, manipulation, and the shocking death that no one in their quiet suburban town ever saw coming. Jennifer Gledhill's life seemed ordinary on the surface, but beneath the appearance of stability and calm, there existed a private struggle that no one around her could see. She lived in a modest but well-kept suburban home with her husband, Marcus, who was devoted to his career as a financial advisor. To neighbors, they looked like the perfect couple, often seen tending to their lawn together or leaving the house in polished cars. Jennifer's friends admired her dedication to nursing, praising her for her patience and ability to stay calm in stressful situations. But what people saw from the outside was only half of the truth. Behind the closed doors of her carefully arranged life, Jennifer carried a restless energy, a longing for something more that she struggled to silence. Her work as a nurse had introduced her to a world of emotions that ran deep. She comforted patients through grief, fear, and pain, but she also absorbed their stories. She often thought about how fragile life was and how easily it could change. In quiet moments, these thoughts settled into her heart, leaving her feeling unsatisfied with the predictability of her marriage. Marcus, though loyal and hardworking, spent long hours at the office. He came home exhausted, sometimes too tired even to hold a conversation. Jennifer told herself that he was providing for their future, but the distance between them grew wider with each passing month. She wanted affection, excitement, and the kind of passion she felt slipping away from her life. It was during this restless period that she crossed paths with Adrian Marrick. He was younger, confident in ways Marcus never had been, and he carried an energy that felt intoxicating. Their first interactions were innocent, casual conversations that meant nothing at the time, but slowly, those moments became the highlight of Jennifer's days. The way Adrian looked at her, the way he made her feel seen, was enough to awaken emotions she thought had long been buried. At first, she resisted the pull, convincing herself that it was only harmless attraction. Yet as weeks turned into months, she allowed herself to slip into a secret world, one that existed entirely outside the life she shared with Marcus. Jennifer told herself she deserved this hidden escape, that it was only temporary, but every decision she made drew her further into a tangled web. She began lying more often, leaving the house under the pretense of late shifts at the hospital. Marcus trusted her without question, and she relied on that trust to cover her tracks. But guilt gnawed at her during quiet moments. In the mirror, she sometimes hardly recognized the woman staring back. The nurse known for her compassion and honesty was slowly being replaced by someone she barely understood. Adrian, on the other hand, was thrilled by their secrecy. He loved the danger, the thrill of stealing moments together when no one else was watching. His energy and charm blinded Jennifer to the warning signs. He was possessive, unpredictable, and sometimes reckless in the way he pushed their relationship forward. Still, she found herself returning to him again and again, chasing the feeling of freedom he gave her. The more she leaned into the affair, the more she distanced herself from Marcus, who began to notice changes he couldn't explain. At first, Marcus brushed off his suspicions. He thought Jennifer's stress from work was affecting her mood, or that her late nights were truly what she claimed. But over time, her excuses began to sound rehearsed, her absence too frequent to ignore. He was no fool, and though he didn't yet confront her, a silent storm was building inside him. What Jennifer didn't realize was that she wasn't just risking her marriage. She was setting into motion events that would spiral far beyond her control. By stepping into the dangerous world with Adrian, she had opened a door that could never be closed. The life she once considered stable was already beginning to fracture, and though the cracks were still hidden from public view, they would soon become impossible to ignore. Marcus Gledhill had begun to sense that something was shifting in his marriage, though he could not yet pinpoint what it was. The distance between him and Jennifer had grown like a widening crack in a wall, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore with time. She was distracted, her attention elsewhere, and though she still smiled at him, The warmth behind those smiles seemed faint and fleeting. He had built his life on the idea that his marriage was secure, that his loyalty and hard work were enough to protect what they had, but a creeping doubt began to take hold of him. He noticed how often she left the house with vague explanations, how her phone was suddenly always in her hand, and how her laughter seemed brighter in moments that had nothing to do with him. The man who spent his days calculating risks and planning finances for others could not ignore the sense that something was being stolen from him right under his nose. Meanwhile, Jennifer was caught in the middle of two worlds. With Marcus, she still carried the mask of the dutiful wife, but with Adrian Marrick she transformed into someone else entirely. Adrian brought out a reckless energy in her, pulling her into nights filled with adrenaline, secrecy, and stolen touch. For Jennifer, the danger of it all was part of the appeal. She told herself she was simply exploring a part of life she had missed, that she would eventually regain control and return to the safety of her marriage. But Adrian was not a man who believed in half measures. He wanted more, he wanted permanence, and he grew increasingly restless with the idea of being kept in the shadows. The affair no longer belonged only to Jennifer and Adrian. Adrian's roommate, Celeste Veyra, became an unexpected part of the web when she uncovered the truth. Celeste was sharp-eyed and quietly observant, the type of person who noticed details others overlooked. She saw Jennifer's visits, overheard fragments of whispered conversations, and pieced together the reality of what was happening. At first, Celeste simply watched with detached curiosity, but over time she began to recognize the leverage she held. The affair was not only a secret, it was a weapon, and in Celeste's mind, it was too valuable to waste. Celeste understood Adrian better than most. She knew he was impulsive, emotional, and driven by his obsession with Jennifer. She also understood Jennifer's vulnerability, the guilt, the fear of being discovered, the longing that kept her tied to a man she should have walked away from. With both of them tangled in this reckless connection, Celeste realized she could manipulate them, steering events in a direction that suited her own desires. She fed Adrian's subtle encouragement, planting seeds of doubt about Jennifer's loyalty to him. She whispered suggestions that Marcus was a threat, that Jennifer's husband would never let go without a fight. To Jennifer, Celeste offered veiled warnings, small reminders that secrets always had a way of surfacing, that people talked, and that nothing stayed hidden forever. The fragile balance between the four of them began to collapse. Marcus grew more suspicious by the day, studying Jennifer's behavior with the precision of a man accustomed to reading numbers and trends. Adrian became more demanding, insisting that Jennifer make a choice, no longer satisfied with stolen afternoons and hurried excuses. Jennifer, torn and fearful, felt trapped between the comfort of her marriage and the thrill of her secret love. And Celeste lingered in the background, stirring the pot, enjoying the chaos she was helping to create. What none of them could see was how dangerous the situation was becoming. Marcus's suspicions were turning into quiet investigations of his own. Adrian's obsession was sliding into desperation, and Celeste's manipulations were tightening the rope around them all. The affair had begun as a reckless escape, but now it was evolving into something far more sinister. The lives of Jennifer, Marcus, Adrian, and Celeste were colliding, each move setting off a chain reaction none of them could stop. The triangle of deceit had already expanded into something unstable and volatile, and the consequences were inching closer with every secret meeting and every whispered lie. Jennifer's carefully guarded secret was beginning to slip beyond her control. The lies she had rehearsed so often no longer sounded convincing, and Marcus's quiet stares at the dinner table carried a weight that unsettled her. She felt his suspicion in the way he lingered on her words, the way his eyes followed her movements as though searching for cracks in her story. For weeks, she had managed to deflect his questions with mentions of late hospital shifts or urgent responsibilities, but Marcus was no longer satisfied with vague answers. He was a man trained to recognize patterns, and the inconsistencies in his wife's life screamed louder with each passing day. Adrian, meanwhile, had reached his breaking point. The stolen hours and secrecy that once thrilled him had become unbearable. He demanded more of Jennifer's time, more commitment, and more promises she could not keep. In his eyes, Marcus was nothing more than an obstacle standing in the way of the life he envisioned. Adrian's frustration simmered into obsession. Every time Jennifer hesitated, he grew more convinced that Marcus had a hold on her, and his jealousy twisted into dangerous. Caught between two men, Jennifer spiraled into fear and confusion. She told herself she could still manage the situation, but her control was already crumbling. Adrian's demands left her exhausted, while Marcus's watchful silence filled her with dread. Each decision felt like a trap, and each lie she told seemed to draw her deeper into a place where there was no way out. What she did not realize was that someone else was fanning the flames behind the scenes. Celeste. Veyra had grown tired of waiting. Celeste thrived on manipulation. She knew Adrian well enough to understand that his obsession with Jennifer could be turned into action if nudged in the right direction. She began to whisper ideas into his ear, carefully crafted words that played on his fears and insecurity. She painted Marcus as a looming threat, suggesting that he might one day uncover the affair and ruin everything for them both. Adrian's unstable emotions made him easy to sway, and Celeste fed into his paranoia until Marcus became more than just a rival. He became a danger in Adrian's mind. At the same time, Celeste began to approach Marcus in subtle ways. She dropped hints, always vague, designed to confirm the doubts he already carried. A chance encounter, a quiet remark about Jennifer's long hours, or a cryptic suggestion that not everything in his marriage was as it seemed. All of it was calculated to stir suspicion. Marcus, though cautious, began to connect the dots, and the storm that had been quietly building inside him grew darker. He did not yet have proof, but he was certain that betrayal was hiding just beneath the surface of his home. The tension reached a peak one night, when Marcus failed to return home from work. He had left his office at the usual time, his car seen on the road by colleagues who drove behind him, but he never arrived at the house. Hours passed, and Jennifer's worry turned into dread. She called friends, the hospital, and eventually the police, but no one had seen him. The next morning, his car was discovered abandoned near a quiet park, keys missing, the driver's side door left slightly ajar. The scene was unsettling, suggesting not a simple accident but something deliberate. The disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. To neighbors, Marcus was the last man anyone expected to vanish without a trace. Investigators immediately began looking into his personal life, and suspicion fell quickly on Jennifer. Her demeanor, her fractured story, and her ties to Adrian Marrick soon surfaced under scrutiny. What had started as whispers of infidelity was transforming into a potential criminal investigation. The quiet suburb that had once admired Jennifer and Marcus as a stable couple was now watching the case unfold with disbelief and unease. Behind it all, Celeste remained hidden in the shadows, watching the chaos she had helped create. She had pulled the strings with precision, and the results were exactly as she wanted. Marcus gone, Jennifer unraveling, and Adrian caught in a web of guilt and paranoia. The perfect storm had arrived, and none of them understood just how far the destruction would spread. The investigation into Marcus Gledhill's disappearance grew more intense with every passing day. Detectives quickly turned their attention to Jennifer, whose behavior seemed far from that of a grieving wife. Her statements were inconsistent, her emotions uneven, and her explanations for her whereabouts on the night Marcus vanished didn't fully align. Investigators noticed she avoided direct eye contact when pressed about her husband's routine. The image of a dedicated nurse and loyal partner began to erode, replaced with the suspicion of a woman hiding something significant. Phone records became the first thread in the unraveling. Investigators obtained Jennifer's call history and found that she had been in frequent contact with a number they traced to Adrian Marrick. Dozens of late-night calls, some lasting nearly an hour, painted a picture far different from what Jennifer initially described. The most incriminating detail was that several of those calls occurred on the very night Marcus failed to come home. Detectives could no longer ignore the link, and Adrian was pulled into the spotlight of the investigation. When questioned, Adrian's confident demeanor quickly collapsed into nervous fidgeting and stammered explanations. He admitted to knowing Jennifer but downplayed their relationship, insisting it was casual and unimportant. Investigators, however, already suspected more. A search of his apartment uncovered small but troubling clues, traces of blood on the carpet near the entrance, hastily cleaned but still detectable, and a jacket with a faint smear that later tested positive for Marcus's DNA. Forensic specialists believed it wasn't accidental contamination, it was evidence of violence. As investigators dug deeper, the name Celeste Veyra surfaced. Adrian's roommate had been largely invisible in Jennifer's story, but her presence in his life was unavoidable. At first, she presented herself as an uninvolved bystander, but her digital footprint told a different tale. Detectives traced online searches from her laptop that included disturbing queries about how to stage disappearances, how long it took for human remains to be identified, and how to erase forensic evidence. The timing of these searches lined up disturbingly well with the days surrounding Marcus's disappearance. Detectives began to see a wider conspiracy forming. It was no longer just a story of a wife with a secret lover, it was a web of deceit with multiple threads. Celeste's role was unclear, but the evidence suggested that she wasn't merely a passive observer. She had knowledge, and possibly influence over the entire situation. Investigators began pressing both her and Adrian harder, applying pressure in hopes of breaking one of them. Then came a breakthrough. A neighbor living near the park where Marcus's car was abandoned reviewed footage from his home's security camera. Though the footage was grainy and poorly lit, it showed a figure resembling Adrian helping move a large object into the trunk of Marcus's own vehicle. The shape was indistinct, but the size and struggle involved suggested it was not just a bag or box. Investigators interpreted the footage as evidence Marcus had been forcibly taken or harmed before his car was staged. The footage alone wasn't enough to secure a conviction, but it was powerful when combined with the blood evidence and the digital trail from Celeste. Investigators believed Marcus had been lured or attacked, and his body hid. With this theory, they doubled down on their search efforts, expanding into abandoned properties and remote sites outside of town. Jennifer, under constant scrutiny, began to collapse under the weight of suspicion. While she denied any involvement in her husband's disappearance, her credibility was fading quickly. The community that once admired her as a nurse and caretaker now whispered about betrayal and murder. Former friends distanced themselves, patients refused to see her at the clinic, and her once respected name became the center of gossip. Meanwhile, detectives were convinced that she knew more than she was willing to admit. Whether she had physically taken part in Marcus's fate or not, her affair and connection to Adrian made her complicit in the tragedy. As the case reached a fever pitch, the missing puzzle piece was still Marcus himself. Without finding his body, everything remained circumstantial, open to doubt in the courtroom. Investigators knew that if they didn't uncover the final truth soon, the conspirators might walk free. The search for Marcus was relentless, and the deeper they looked, the closer they drew to uncovering the chilling reality of what had truly happened on the night he vanished. The breakthrough investigators had been chasing came after weeks of frustration. Search teams scoured fields, abandoned warehouses, and wooded areas, guided by the digital footprints left behind by Celeste Veyra. Finally, at an unfinished construction site on the outskirts of town, a shallow grave was discovered. Within it lay the body of Marcus Gledhill, partially covered with soil and broken debris. The scene was grim, yet it gave detectives the confirmation they needed. This was no disappearance, it was murder. The autopsy revealed Marcus had been struck repeatedly with a blunt object, his injuries brutal and deliberate. The finding eliminated any suggestion of accident and cemented the case as a calculated crime. Forensic experts quickly tied evidence from the grave back to Adrian. Traces of Marcus's blood matched the samples found in Adrian's apartment, and soil on Adrian's shoes contained the same mix of gravel and concrete dust present at the construction site. Investigators also uncovered DNA under Marcus's fingernails that pointed to both Adrian and Celeste, suggesting Marcus had fought desperately before his death. With every new detail, the conspiracy became clearer and the circle of guilt tightened. As the evidence piled up, detectives worked tirelessly to dismantle the lies. Adrian's interrogation sessions revealed cracks in his story. Under pressure,
His defensiveness gave way to partial admission. He confessed to attacking Marcus during a confrontation but attempted to shift the blame to Celeste. According to his account, Celeste had manipulated him, fueling his jealousy and convincing him Marcus posed a threat to Jennifer. Adrian insisted he never meant for things to escalate as far as they had, but the brutality of Marcus's injuries told a different story. Celeste, on the other hand, denied everything. She portrayed herself as an innocent roommate dragged unwillingly into a situation she never asked for. Yet her internet searches, phone records, and presence in Adrian's apartment during the critical hours told investigators otherwise. The prosecution argued that while Adrian had carried out the physical act of violence, Celeste had orchestrated much of it behind the scenes. Together they formed a deadly partnership, with Jennifer unknowingly setting the pieces into motion through her affair. When the case finally reached the courtroom, it drew intense attention. Reporters filled the seats, neighbors came to watch, and the Gledhill family sat stone-faced as every sordid detail was revealed. Jennifer, though not on trial for murder, became the centerpiece of the narrative. The prosecution painted her as the catalyst, the woman whose betrayal led to Marcus's death, while the defense argued she had no knowledge of the plan and was merely guilty of poor judgment. The trial became less about one act of violence and more about a web of deceit, passion, and manipulation that ended in tragedy. The verdicts shocked no one who had followed the evidence closely. Adrian Marrick was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. His obsession with Jennifer and his violent jealousy had culminated in a crime that destroyed multiple lives. Celeste Veyra was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and accessory after the fact, earning a lengthy sentence of her own. Her attempt to manipulate events from the shadows had backfired, leaving her with decades behind bars. Jennifer Gledhill walked out of the courtroom a free woman, but her freedom came at a devastating cost. Though she was never charged with Marcus's murder, her reputation was shattered beyond repair. The community no longer saw her as the kind-hearted nurse they once trusted, but as the woman whose secret affair paved the road to her husband's grave. Friends abandoned her, her career crumbled, and she lived under the constant shadow of whispers and judgment. The case became a chilling reminder of how hidden desires and reckless decisions can spiral out of control. What began as a secret search for passion ended with a husband buried in a shallow grave, a lover sentenced to life, and a manipulative roommate imprisoned for years. Jennifer was left with the heaviest burden of all, the knowledge that her choices had sparked a chain reaction of betrayal, violence, and death.